The buzzard circled first, black commas punctuating a merciless sky. Jedediah, tracing a lost carve through the jagged canyons, saw them and his gut tightened. It was a language he knew, death, or something close to it. He spurred his weary mare, Ghost, towards the obscene gathering. What he found wasn't the work of coyotes or the casual cruelty of the desert. Beneath a meager, hastily piled cairn of rocks, a small hand, caked in dirt and dried blood, clawed feebly at the unforgiving earth. Buried alive. The word screamed in his mind, a jolt of ice through his veins. He was off Ghost in an instant, his weathered hands, usually steady on reins or rifle, now frantic as they tore at the stones. He unearthed a child, a girl no older than 10, wrapped in filthy rags, a deep, tattered hood pulled low over her face. Her breathing was a faint, rasping whisper, a chilling counterpoint to the wind sighing through the Ocotillo. He didn't think, he acted. The solitude he'd cultivated for a decade, a shield against a past too raw to touch, shattered. This was a horror beyond reckoning, an affront to the very sun that beat down upon them. He lifted her, a feather-light burden of pain, and laid her gently across his saddle. Her eyes, when they flickered open for a scant second, were pits of primal terror. He murmured reassurances, words he hadn't spoken to another soul in years, his voice raspy from disuse and emotion. Back at his small, isolated ranch, a collection of weathered wood and stubborn hope clinging to the edge of nowhere, he worked with a desperate tenderness. He cleaned the grime from her small face, his touch hesitant. She flinched from every contact, a wounded animal expecting another blow. The hood remained, a dark shroud she clutched as if it were her only anchor. He didn't force it. He offered water, then a thin broth, most of which she couldn't keep down. He sat vigil through the night, the oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the turmoil in his own heart. A forgotten ache, the ghost of his own lost daughter, twisted within him. He was a man who had fled from connection, from the agony of loss, yet here he was, tethered to this fragile life by a thread of shared humanity. What darkness had birthed such cruelty? And what terrors still clung to this child, hidden beneath that tattered hood? The questions hung in the oppressive silence of the small cabin, a prelude to a storm he could feel gathering on the distant horizon of his broken peace. Days bled into a week. The girl, Ilara, as he'd eventually coaxed her name from her, remained mostly silent, her world contained within the shadowed recesses of her hood. She ate little, her eyes darting like trapped birds at every sound. Jedediah moved with quiet patience, mending fences, tending his meager stock, always aware of the small, still presence in his cabin. He spoke to her softly, telling her about Ghost, about the way the desert bloomed after a rare rain, simple things that asked nothing in return. He saw the bruises, the welts hidden by her rags, the way she instinctively curled in on herself if he moved too quickly. This was no accident, this was deliberate torment. Slowly, painstakingly, a sliver of trust began to form. She started watching him, her gaze less fearful, more searching. One evening, as he was cleaning his rifle by the firelight, she finally spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. "They'll come for me." Jedediah stopped, the click of the rifle mechanism suddenly loud in the stillness. "Who, child?" Her small hands twisted the edge of her hood. "Father," and the brothers a chill deeper than the night air settled over him. "Father." She shook her head, a tiny, violent negation. "Not my real father. He owns us thus." The word was a stone dropped into a dark well. She told him of a community hidden deep in the Badlands, a place of harsh rules and harsher punishments, ruled by a man they called Father Silas. She had run, an act of unimaginable bravery for one so small and broken. The stakes, already impossibly high, ratcheted up another notch. This wasn't just a lost child, this was an escapee, hunted. Jedediah felt the old instincts, the ones he'd tried to bury with his past, stir within him. The protector, dormant for so long, began to awaken. He looked out the cabin window, towards the vast, empty expanse. But it wasn't empty anymore. Far in the distance, almost imperceptible, a faint plume of dust rose against the bruised twilight sky. They were coming. He knew it with a certainty that settled like iron in his soul. He had sought peace in isolation, but the world, in its cruelty and its need, had found him. And what choice did a man have when a desperate plea was whispered not in words, but in the silent terror of a child's eyes? The dust cloud grew, resolving itself into 3 riders. Jedediah stood on the porch of his cabin, shotgun resting loosely in the crook of his arm. Ilara cowered behind him, a small hand clutching the back of his worn leather vest. The riders reined in, their horses restless, kicking up dust that swirled around their legs like malevolent spirits. The man in the center, tall and imposing despite the trail weariness, possessed an air of unnerving charisma. His smile, when it came, didn't reach his eyes, they were cold, assessing, like a hawk's. "Greetings, friend," the man called out, his voice smooth, almost pastoral. "We're looking for a lost child. A ward of our community, prone to wanderings." A girl named Ilara. Jedediah's gaze was flat, unyielding. "Don't know any lost children, Silas, for it could be no other," let out a sigh, a sound of exaggerated patience. "She's troubled, simple. Needs our guidance, our protection. We mean her no harm, only to bring her back to the folder." His eyes flicked to the cabin door, a predatory gleam within them. "She's here. I can feel her fear." One of the henchmen, a brute with a scarred face, shifted, his hand moving towards the pistol on his hip. Jedediah's shotgun came up a fraction, the movement slight but unequivocal. "This is my land." "You're not welcome." Silas's smile tightened. "I am Father Silas. And I always reclaim what is mine." The civility was a thin veneer, cracking to reveal the threat beneath. "She's not property," Jedediah stated, his voice low and gravelly. "She's a child." A tense silence stretched, broken only by the snorting of the horses. Then, chaos. The scarred henchman lunged. Jedediah moved with a speed that belied his years, the shotgun roaring, sending a blast of buckshot into the dirt inches from the man's boot. The henchman recoiled, cursing. Silas raised a hand, his expression hardening into pure malice. "You're making a grave mistake, old man." "A very grave mistake." He stared at Jedediah, then at the trembling girl half hidden behind him. "We'll be back. And when we return, this little sanctuary of yours will burn." They wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving a trail of dust and palpable menace. The immediate threat had passed, but the air remained thick with impending doom. Ilara, trembling violently, finally stumbled forward. The struggle, the fear, had dislodged her hood. It fell back, revealing not just the tear-streaked, dirt-smudged face of a terrified child, but something else. Something that made Jedediah's blood run cold. There, seared onto her temple, was a fresh, brutally rendered brand, a coiled serpent with a single, burning eye. He'd seen crude drawings of it whispered about in saloons, a mark of slavers, of a shadow cult that dealt in human misery, their tendrils rumored to reach into places of power. This wasn't just a cruel man, this was organized evil. Ilara looked up at him, her eyes wide with a terror that finally found words. He calls himself a prophet," she choked out, "but he's a devil. He collects children. Orphans of the storm. He calls us for the mines. The silver mines hidden in the blackwood. Many die. Those who don't, he sells them. Or worse." She fumbled inside her tattered dress, her small hand shaking, and pulled out a small, oilskin wrap packet. "I took this from his study. It's his ledger. Names, dates, payments. Proof." The words hit Jedediah like a physical blow. This girl, this tiny, broken child, held the key to unmasking a monster whose evil was far greater, far more widespread than he could have imagined. This ledger, if its contents were true, wouldn't just shock the West, it could tear it apart. And Silas would stop at nothing, absolutely nothing, to get it back and silence her forever. The weight of her revelation settled upon Jedediah, heavy as a shroud. A ledger. Proof of horrors that would make the devil himself blush. He looked at the brand on Ilara's temple, a mark of possession, of unimaginable suffering. This was no longer just about protecting a child, it was about confronting an evil that poisoned the very land they stood on. "He'll come back with more men," Jedediah said, his voice grim. It wasn't a question. Ilara nodded, her small face pale but resolute. The terror was still there, but a flicker of something else was kindling in her eyes, a desperate, defiant courage. He saw it, and a strange, fierce pride swelled in his chest. For years, he had been a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life, running from the pain of his past, the war, the sickness that took his wife and child, the crushing weight of a grief that had hollowed him out. Now, this small, branded girl had given him a reason to stand, to fight, not just for her, but for the man he used to be. They had little time. He worked with a feverish intensity, boarding up windows, reinforcing the door, checking his meager supply of ammunition. Ilara, surprisingly, helped. She fetched water, tore strips of cloth for bandages, her movements economical, her gaze watchful. She knew the cost of failure. As they worked, she spoke more, fragments of her life in Silas's hellish community, the endless labor, the starvation, the constant fear, the disappearances she told him of others, children like her, their spirits slowly being crushed. Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of Jedediah's solitude. He found himself talking too, more than he had in a decade. He told her about Ghost, his mare, how he'd found her half dead, much like Ilara, and nursed her back to health. He didn't speak of his deeper losses, not yet, but she seemed to understand the shadows in his eyes. A fragile bond, forged in shared adversity and unspoken pain, grew between them. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire, a fitting backdrop for what was to come. Then, they heard it, the distant thunder of hooves, many hooves. Silas was returning, and he was not coming for a parley. Jedediah positioned Ilara in the small root cellar beneath the cabin, a space barely large enough for her to hide. "Stay down, no matter what you hear," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. "Promise me, Ilara." She clutched the precious ledger to her chest. "I promise," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Be safe, Jedediah." He touched her cheek, a fleeting, paternal gesture. Then he rose, took his rifle, and faced the door. The siege began with a volley of gunfire that splintered the wood of the cabin walls. Shouts and curses echoed in the twilight. Jedediah returned fire sparingly, making each shot count. He was one man against many, a fact that Silas undoubtedly relished. Hours crawled by. The cabin became a death trap, bullets punching through the thin walls. Jedediah moved like a wraith, using the darkness, the familiar layout of his home, to his advantage. He took down 2 of Silas's men, their cries abruptly silenced in the night. But they were relentless. They tried to set the cabin alight, but a lucky shot from Jedediah extinguished the torch. The fight was desperate, brutal. This wasn't just a fight for a girl. This was a stand against the encroaching darkness, a defiant roar against a world that too often turned a blind eye to suffering. This was a fight for a soul, hers and perhaps his own. But how long could one man, however determined, hold back the tide of such calculated malice? The night was long, and the dawn seemed a distant, impossible dream. The first rays of dawn, pale and tentative, filtered through the bullet-riddled walls, illuminating a scene of devastation. The air was thick with gunpowder smoke and the stench of fear. Jedediah was wounded, a searing pain in his left arm, but adrenaline and a cold rage kept him on his feet. He was down to his last few rounds. Silas, impatient and enraged by the unexpected resistance, ordered a final, brutal assault. They stormed the cabin, kicking in the weakened door, their faces contorted with bloodlust. Jedediah fought like a cornered wolf, his rifle but a club, his hunting knife a desperate fang. He went down under a hail of blows, the world tilting into a red haze. Silas stood over him, his charismatic mask gone, replaced by a sneer of pure, triumphant evil. "You should have stayed out of what doesn't concern you, old man," he hissed, pressing the barrel of his pistol to Jedediah's temple. "Now, you die." And then, the girl, but what Silas didn't know, what none of them could have anticipated, was the fire that had been kindled in Ilara. Hearing the sounds of the final struggle, the sickening thud of Jedediah falling, she couldn't stay hidden. She burst from the root cellar, not with a weapon, but with the ledger held high, her small voice ringing out with astonishing power. "Stop! or everyone will know." Silas froze, momentarily startled. His men paused, confused. Ilara, small and insignificant in their eyes moments before, now held their attention captive. "This," she cried, her voice trembling but clear, "this is Father Silas's truth. His list of stolen children. His profits from their stolen lives. His deals with men you think are righteous." She named names from the ledger, prominent figures in nearby towns, men Silas's followers revered or feared. "He branded us. He sold us. He buried those who broke." Her words, raw and filled with righteous fury, struck some of the henchmen. Doubt flickered in their eyes. They had followed Silas out of fear or a twisted loyalty, but the stark, detailed accusations coming from this child, holding what was clearly an account book, gave them pause. This wasn't the guidance they'd been told of. This was monstrous. That moment of hesitation was all Jedediah needed. With a desperate surge of strength, he lunged, not at Silas, but at the man's gun hand, deflecting the shot that would have ended his life. The bullet went wide, striking a lantern. Oil spilled, flames erupted, catching on dry wood. Chaos. In the ensuing pandemonium, as fire began to spread, Ilara's accusations hung in the air. Some of Silas's men, their loyalty shattered by the girl's words and the damning evidence of the ledger, turned on their fellows or simply fled the burning scene. Silas, enraged, lunged for Ilara, the ledger his only thought. But Jedediah, ignoring his wounds, met him. Their final confrontation was brutal, short, and decisive. It ended with Silas falling, consumed by the very flames of greed and destruction he had sought to unleash. Jedediah, grabbing Ilara, stumbled out of the burning cabin just as the roof collapsed. They stood there, coughing in the smoke-filled dawn, watching the pyre of Silas's reign. The surviving henchmen, those who hadn't fled, threw down their weapons, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. The reign of Father Silas, the hidden tyrant, was over, brought down by the courage of one small girl and the unexpected resolve of a broken man. The ledger, clutched tightly in Ilara's hand, was singed but intact. The truth it held would indeed shock the entire West, unmasking corruption and cruelty that had festered in darkness for too long. Jedediah looked at Ilara, her face smudged with soot, her eyes reflecting the morning light. She was no longer just a victim, she was a survivor, a bringer of truth. And he, the recluse, the man who thought his heart was dead, felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The fight was over, but their journey, he suspected, was just beginning. Together, they would face the dawn, and perhaps, build a future from the ashes. A future where the innocent were protected, and where even the most broken souls could find redemption. For sometimes, all it takes is one act of courage, one spark of defiance, to change the world. And who among us can say what hidden strength lies waiting, even now, to answer the call?